Welcome to the Transform Tomorrow Today podcast, a series dedicated to the complex and exciting world of change in organizations. We are your hosts, Linda McLaughlin and Catherine Tano, and are both global experts in organization development and change management, working across 5 continents. We help organizations navigate the challenges of transformation successfully, using our expertise as consultants and master coaches over many decades.
In this podcast series, we invite leaders who are at the forefront of transformation to share their own stories and reflect on the lessons learned with changemakers like you. Following each interview, we analyze the case and summarize the key messages and takeaways. Welcome to our community of inspiring changemakers, transforming tomorrow today.
Please join me in welcoming our guest for this episode, Maeve Coburn. Maeve is a beauty and wellness industry expert with a successful 35-year international career with L'Oréal. Maeve has 22 years' experience in GM and senior marketing roles for well-known luxury beauty brands, including Lancôme, Kérastase, La Roche-Posay, and has 13 years' experience leading Learning for Transformation for the Americas and Global Learning and Change for Beauty Tech. She is founder of Maeve Works and a founding member of the MIT Sloan Women of New York. She is also an accredited systemic team coach and Gestalt organization practitioner. You're most welcome, Maeve.
Thank you, Catherine and Linda. I'm delighted to be here.
Let me briefly hand over to Catherine to give us some context to L'Oréal.
L'Oréal is the world leader in beauty for over 110 years, with over 40 global brands in the consumer, luxury, dermatology, travel retail, and salon categories. They employ over 87,000 people worldwide. Because they are a global leader in beauty, they have the ambition to drive social innovation, to build a business with inclusivity, and to protect the beauty of the planet by fighting climate change and preserving natural resources. The organization is constantly evolving to face new challenges with its people strategy at the heart of the transformation. Maeve, can you share with us the one thing you are most proud of in terms of your change initiatives?
Well, I guess I have to talk about it in the context of L'Oréal because I've just ended a very long life career with that amazing company. And I would say the one thing I'm most proud of is that I have been part of molding and shaping the culture to be more empowering and more human-centered.
Wow, the culture. I think you mentioned a few things about the feedback culture, how the leaders have been trained in receiving and giving feedback. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I've been part of an amazing group transformation, and obviously it takes a village to make any change happen. In 2015, so we're talking almost like 8 years ago now, which is hard to believe, the company was going through a big structural transformation with the advent of the digital transformation that everyone was facing and moving from a traditional company with brick and mortar stores and more mass marketing, let's say, marketing that wasn't so targeted, and recognizing that there were a lot of new entrants into the market, and the company wanted to divert resources from traditional investment to new investment and new métiers and new skills. And at the same time, recognize through that work that you could not change something structurally without looking at the soft tissue, looking at how humans are interacting, how our leaders are leading, how our employees are engaged. And it was very obvious that you couldn't do a structural transformation that would stick without looking at the people side of change. And I've been privileged to be on this journey of really looking at the messy side of transformation, actually. And I was privileged to work with a leadership team that looked at this data and didn't point to others to make change happen, also recognized that they needed to look in the mirror. And beyond the traditional 360 assessments, etc., it was clear that you cannot make change happen without looking personally at your role in change, and also being very honest about the feedback that you're receiving and what you're going to do about it. And we went from anonymized feedback, pulse surveys every few years, to getting that data actually during the first few years of this transformation quarterly, doing health checks on employee engagement, on understanding the transformation, on being part of the transformation. And then leaders being willing to take very direct feedback from their teams. And I can share more about what we actually did on that. But I guess the culmination of all of that was after a couple of years of receiving that feedback in a very personal and direct way, they all agreed that they would be held accountable to upward feedback as part of their bonus, actually.
Very impressive.
I'm fascinated by what you're calling this soft tissue change, which is really hugely about the leadership and the leadership stepping up. What did you begin to notice as people opened up to this feedback? What became different day to day?
Well, first of all, I think it was awareness, truly deeply listening to the feedback, not just looking at the feedback like it's a dashboard and looking at a number and a score, and not looking at it like the cognitive left brain exercise, a problem I can fix. And it became much more awareness of how human behavior change is one of the hardest things a human can do. And as a leader, if they're very honest about making change happen for their teams and for this lived experience in this company, that they had to do a lot more deep work. And so I would say what changed was they started to recognize that this wasn't a problem to fix, but it was actually something that they had to work on and set goals on. And what I really liked about this, I learned myself, is red is good. There's not an end to this where you suddenly get a great scorecard and your job is done. That when you get difficult feedback, you actually don't swallow it whole, but you pick something and you ask for help and you see progress happen. And I think they started to celebrate small wins. And it's amazing, the little things that feel small can really accumulate. And over a 3 to 5 year period, I really saw a difference in how leaders were listening to their people, cared about them, genuinely cared about their people, took time to ask for and give developmental feedback. And then obviously the overall scores. I mean, there is the data piece of it, and Net Promoter Score for employees did significantly improve over a 5 year period.
Wow. Really, really deep transformation there, Maeve. And how did you support these leaders in opening up and then taking action?
That was quite a journey, actually. And I recognize that there are no experts in this field. And this is what's amazing to me. I mean, you have people that are highly skilled, but it's an emergent process of learning when you're in a system like this. And I think educating people, we use this metaphor of the desert that people loved, actually, because it really made them realize that, I don't know if this is a metaphor that everyone would appreciate, but that Egypt is burning and you have to cross the desert and you have to go one step at a time, and you may not know where the promised land is. But me, as a head of learning, I surrounded myself with people who were more skilled than I was on transformational change. I had a Gestalt OD expert by my side who had been working with other companies for over 20 years. But we always wanted to be a half step ahead of everybody else, helping people make those small changes and then see how it would come to life. I think we helped create space for feedback. We created experiences, interventions for leaders with their direct reports, where they had an example of this was actually a game changer at the beginning of this journey, where the CEO and the top 75 leaders in the US agreed individually to do a quick survey. We did SurveyMonkey at the time, nothing special, about what they're doing well, what they could do differently, and how is their leadership behavior impacted the performance of their people. And then they got that data, and then we created a space, a circle with no tables, with the leader and the direct reports and the coach, just to help create safety. And the leader was not allowed to speak other than to name a couple of the themes through the data. They could only say thank you and write notes. And we had designed this for 1 hour, but it always ran over to an hour and a half because people were on a roll. And we opened up for people to give examples of what the leader did well, first of all. We were very intentional about making space for what's working first. And then where the development opportunity is, and then stories of how it impacted them. And at the beginning, people were so afraid. We thought, oh my goodness, we're going to sit in silence. but it was magical what unfolded. And then the leader at the end could only say thank you. And then with the coach or on their own, digest, and 3 or 4 days later, go back to their team with what they were going to work on. Not solve at home, but what were the things that they were going to work on. And I would just say that it was extremely emotional, and change on this side is not just cognitive, it is emotional. And interestingly, many leaders got more emotional about what they were doing well. They didn't want to hear what they were doing well. They wanted to hear about what the problems they had to fix so they could, but they recognized how important it is to hear it all and to own the good and the shadow side and then start to do the real work. So that's an example of that. And then just to finish on what I did, I only did this as part of a team, but we created a roster of highly trained coaches who were able to do team interventions. So it wasn't just about individual leadership coach. It was actually about leader and team and helping make interventions so that the teams could start to really work in what are the working principles as a team? How are they going to give each other feedback? How do you have a masterful conversation? And a lot of basic team skills that I see in action 8 years later today.
I wanted to comment on the last point you mentioned, that you have recruited and trained a specific team of coaches. Can you explain how you managed to find those combination of individual and collective coaching? What were the tools they were using? How they make it happen with you?
So that was not an easy task at all. We have some fabulous individual executive coaches that don't want anything to do with team coaching. And I can understand it's not for everybody. And I also recognized that there were some coaches that were truly gifted in this space. And I have to say my lived experience was the best coaches went through a Gestalt leadership training where you really learned about systemic change and levels of system, managing ecosystems, wearing the coach hat, but also wearing a consultant hat, but in a very carefully intentional way, to be a coach, consultant, an interventionist, to be able to be a little bit more provocative than perhaps a traditional coach might be when it comes to the team, when it comes to asking a provocative question, when it comes to holding up the mirror. And when it comes to tools, we recognized very quickly that it's not about the tools. There may be some basic light tools. It's about enabling people to make contact with each other. And my experience was that tools can be a distraction. It can be the shiny new object. People can hide behind the tool and get back to the left, overthinking the cognitive brain and all excited about the framework and not getting to the real conversation that has to happen for people to really understand what's happening in their team and what they need to do to move forward.
Wonderful, Maeve. So rich. You went deep with these people. You really did. I'm fascinated by your reference to Gestalt, first of all, in terms of whole systems. And I'm also interested in something you mentioned around the shadow side. And I'm wondering how they played out in terms of resistance, if any.
One thing on the shadow side, it's so interesting. We had massive debates. So I'm in the US and the teams are very multinational and obviously a lot of French leadership because it's a global L'Oreal, massive piece of the global business. And a lot of French leaders that have traveled the world were super uncomfortable with the positive feedback. And it's almost like no news is good news. And that's just worth the shadow side because we have to really understand that and fix it. And I've learned there's a lot of interesting data on this. And it's not just Americans who need to be given an A+ every time. This is very funny. A lot of French people said, oh, the Americans, you need to give them all this positive feedback and tell them what a great job they're doing, that they're superheroes. And then they're like teenagers. I'm paraphrasing and exaggerating for effect. But basically, when you practice this and when leaders, whatever their nationality, practiced making space for the positive, receiving and giving the positive feedback, and then working the shadow side, then people are actually in a learning mindset. They're not in a performance mindset. So I think this is super important to balance the strengths and the development areas on that. And so there were cultural obstacles, there were limiting beliefs around this positive feedback, giving and receiving. And I see it in action today more than ever. I think it's more important today more than ever with the emphasis and the criticality of diversity as a business and a human driver. So that was really important. And then Gestalt, I'm not sure if the positive and shadow side is only Gestalt, but for me, Gestalt It's a very fancy name, the Gestalt, it's like a mystery name. And when you look up what is the whole figure and the Gestalt therapy. And for me, the actual getting that into my skin of being an interventionist, a coach interventionist, and understanding how to design an intervention, how to read a room and read what is in the room and be fully present of what is. I just learned, I'm always learning, I'm still a student, but if you can channel what you're seeing in the room, it can really unlock magic. And I know this also in the executive coaching world, people can get so worked up into their stories. But if you really go to the tone, the body language, just the silence, the reading what's truly in the room, it's extremely powerful. It's the paradoxical theory of change, that if people are truly aware of what's actually happening, the change will naturally start to unlock. Most people, we miss so many signals of what is in the room.
Wow.
You are describing something that is very near to the human essence, the presence, heart to heart. And we have the next question in how to make it scalable, how to roll it out in a group such as L'Oréal, with so many culture, with so many diverse people everywhere, to make a true developmental culture.
And it is a journey. I mean, L'Oréal is an organization of imperfect humans like any other organization. However, there is a unique culture in L'Oréal. There's this concept in French, saisir ce qui commence. When people see something working, and when a leader has had that experience, like the CEO of the US at the time, and when they start to share that with their peers, and when others experience it, I think things can go quite fast in an organization, and it can happen organically. A change happens top down, bottom up, and in the middle. And you have to intervene at each level to make real change happen at scale. So clearly, you couldn't scale this very intentional leader with teams, creating the safe space. We did that for, let's say, approximately 100 leaders when all was said and done. And I think they did some internationally as well. I think the leadership program, Catherine, you might be aware of, the Lead and Enable, that our CEO at the time globally said we need to train 8,000 leaders on how to lead and empower and enable with these skills of feedback and masterful conversations and building trust, which is so critical. And I think they managed to do that at different levels. I was a bit of a skeptic when it came to the e-learnings. There were a lot of e-learnings and little kind of interventionist kits for local HRs to do with their teams, which had limiting success because you do really need to practice that, the facilitation interventionist at work. In the US, we had an interesting concept. We created a facilitation squad. We had HR people volunteer to be trained on some of these tools and then to sign up, to set up a flex learning, a program that employees could opt into. And that had quite an interesting, scalable effect in the US side. And I thought that was quite interesting, but it takes serious work. It takes serious learning teamwork to keep and to create a bar that you had to achieve to be a facilitator. Because we literally tested them and you either passed or failed. You had to do the work, you had to go in front of a panel. But all of that is like internal resources that you have to put into learning, which I think L'Oréal is doing, but it's a work in progress.
So a lot of effort into the scaling and the cascade effect, if you like. And I know at one point we had talked about NPS, Net Promoter Score, and you talked about a dashboard. So this transformation piece, how was that linked to improving NPS?
Well, the question for Net Promoter Scores, I think, is something to the effect of, would you recommend your company to a friend or a family member? And it's on a scale of 1 to 10 with, net promoter, net detractor. There's a clear link and correlation between recommending a company and feeling highly engaged and empowered in a company and being aligned with the sense of purpose of the company and seeing yourself with a future at the company. So there's a very direct correlation between that and the dashboard. In fact, I was just looking at this for a very interesting intervention with a group of lawyers. And I'm recognizing there's a lot of things in common. Human nature is human nature. But the dashboard on the feedback is actively listens, asks for feedback, which is one that people got lowest scores on. Leaders like to give feedback. They don't naturally feel comfortable asking for feedback. And that became very quickly one of the factors that we had to really push home, that you need to ask as well as receive, no matter how senior a leader you are at every level of the organization. So that was interesting. How you receive feedback was one of the things that was really interesting because again, we're all conditioned, human behavior and human nature. We're conditioned to look at problems to be fixed. Things are problems to solve. When it comes to breaking a lifetime of giving feedback as a leader or going to school and expecting your teacher to give you feedback, but making it two ways, treating people as equals, that takes a lot of unlearning and learning new behaviors.
It implies also that you have created enough psychological safety around you for the leader, for the employee, for the teams. How did you manage to do that? I know that HR had a major role in L'Oréal, but in this specific case, maybe you had a specific role.
Well, psychological safety is a buzzword at the moment, even now. I mean, it's more and more critical as more and more voices are opening up now with so much going on in the world. The learning team had great trust, I would say, going through this transformation. And the coach partners we had helped create that safety. We always started meetings with guiding principles and have people in the room, the team name. Okay, so what would make you feel safe in the room? So that was it. Make space and take space was an interesting one because people like to talk a lot and others like to not talk. So how do you become more intentional about when to use your voice and when to actually turn to somebody you haven't heard a voice from yet? And often a coach might make an observation without making people feel uncomfortable to just say, well, we've heard from so-and-so and so-and-so. There are other voices we haven't heard from. Who else would like to speak? And just making that space to open up and to make awareness of the fact that not all voices are being heard would start to make the people who would be less comfortable perhaps to dare to express themselves. And I saw little simple things like these principles that we want to all abide by and having it be co-created or the team creating at the beginning of these meetings is a small thing that really does make a difference. But as I said, Catherine, psychological safety is a work in progress.
You spent also a lot of time to train your HR.
Yes, absolutely. I'm on the HR training front. So, I mean, Catherine, you know this, in 2015, at the beginning of this transformation, I think a breakthrough program from HR was coaching tools for HR, having our top HR and learning leaders go through 65 hours of coach training in a very deep way in cohorts that built bonds that I see are strong to this day. But having HR really learn those skills and not to become internal coaches, but to be able to diagnose the needs, which is so critical. And to be able to really have the listening skills and the coach posture. And then that has actually spread over to leaders now because you have amazing HR people that have those coach skills. And then some leaders have started to see that and ask for their opportunity to be trained. And I think coaching tools for leaders is really the next frontier because that is the new role of leader, particularly in this world of generative AI and data revolution. It's going to be more and more critical to have this coach posture as a leader.
So Maeve, as you reflect back on this transformation program, what would you identify as maybe one or two key lessons and maybe lessons that you could share with the audience?
For me, a key lesson was you need continuity of teams, first of all. Like I had an amazing team. You didn't have people leaving their jobs every 12 to 15 months. You have to be at least 5 years, particularly in an HR or learning role, to see this change, to guide and to help shape. And I think my first lesson learned would be that it's going to take much longer than you think. But when you look back, it's actually amazing what you can achieve in a relatively short period of time. So it's a bit of a paradox. But I think change, culture change, behavior change, shifting soft tissue in organization and making change happen, it just takes time and you have to recognize that. And at the same time, you have to stay ambitious and have clear measures, metrics of success. Because even this ENPS thing, which a lot of people resisted at the beginning, that became something because we saw the change over 5 years. Like, oh my goodness, we did do something. And then another one was just other things like people who left the company and came back, like, this is a different company. People are listening to each other. People care about my development. I have a development plan. People want to know about my career aspirations, is opportunity. So I think having measure, knowing it takes time, having people in their jobs that are committed. And I do think there's a servant leadership piece. You have to have leaders who care, who genuinely care about the employee experience, care about the value they're bringing that the company is delivering to employees, as well as to obviously the consumers and the shareholders, all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. But employees are a critical piece of it. And for me, that work has paid off because L'Oréal is doing extremely well. And I just read the latest stockholder newsletter today from Jean-Paul Agon and Nicolas Ronimus. And they talk a lot about the great business model. L'Oréal has amazing brands, has a great business model, and it has 87,400 people that they say is the secret sauce and the secret to the culture. And I would say for anyone who has an organization with humans, they are the secret sauce. That either you haven't yet unlocked or that you're unlocking, you can continue to empower even more.
Wonderful. We are arriving to the conclusion of our conversation. If you had one advice to a younger HR starting such a journey, what would it be?
I would say you are entering a métier that is probably the most strategic métier in a company and the least glorified. The least glorified and the most strategic has the potential to be. So don't ever let anyone put you in a box. You're hired to do a job. Do your job and also recognize that you are a conduit for people to elevate and bring the amazing contributions they can bring. And you can really help guide and shape that.
Great words of advice, Maeve. And with that, look, thank you so much for sharing L'Oréal's unique and powerful story of soft tissue transformation. We are really inspired, and especially how you kind of integrated a systemic and gestalt aspect into everything you do. Thank you again.
Well, thank you. And just thank you both because you're creating a forum for us all to learn. And I am learning as much from you and this great circle of peers we all belong to. So I think it's a beautiful, positive spiral together.
Thank you, Maeve.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Stay connected. We will share our analysis.
So, Catherine, the L'Oréal case is really fascinating, particularly given the breadth of the intervention and also the depth at the individual and the team level. I know you were professionally involved with L'Oréal as an external consultant for many years. So what are the main things that sit with you about the story?
Yeah, that's true. I've been working with them since 2013 now, and they are really transforming the culture. They are transforming the leadership culture, creating these leader enablers to empower people, to create engagement, to develop the people proximity, and really to put the people at the center of their company. And the second aspect of this transformation is the teams, the place of the team. They had a slogan called "Teams are the new heroes," with the intention and the ambition, which has succeeded, to develop really collective intelligence and collective coaching among teams. That was really interesting what Maeve said about the importance of the noticing what is happening in the room in real time with the teams, how they behave and how they get aware of their behavior. So yes, that's really a fascinating way to grow people and teams.
And on the leader development part, the centrality of feedback was really, really important there. And how, in a way, the intervention sought to normalize feedback, especially for senior leaders. And we know from working in various organizations that the more senior you are, in general, the less feedback you get. And it was such a brave step, I thought, and particularly also given the multicultural nature of their workplace, to insist on that upward feedback, and where the leader had to be so vulnerable and sit in the room with their team and be in listening mode and manage their emotions and manage the tendency to get defensive. I thought that was a real breakthrough piece in the whole leader development and creating a culture of awareness, really, self-awareness and humanity. But also what struck me in what Maeve said was the difficulty some leaders had in accepting positive feedback, that it wasn't the negative feedback necessarily that was the tough part, but accepting their strengths and accepting what they were doing really, really well. And again, that's another interesting feature of leadership culture in any organization.
What also is really interesting about this, the role of HR in this major change, because actually they could have done without HR, but they choose to put the HR as the agent of change with a very, very strategic role. And that's quite inspiring for me, putting HR as a leader of change and training them in coaching skills and organizational development skills and change management skills. So they're really equipping and upskilling their HR leaders, and they are putting them at the forefront of the transformation to scale up. Because the challenge in this kind of change is really being able to scale up everywhere in the world. When you are around 10,000 leaders and managers in charge of teams, it's really a challenge. So without HR, you cannot do it. So I think that's quite inspiring for other company too.
I loved what she said, that HR really, when doing transformation work, it is the most strategic role in the organization, but the least glorified. Because often, I think at the C-suite level in particular, HR is seen as a support function rather than a key leader in terms of the vision for the future for the organization. So I think L'Oréal are really walking that talk of putting people at the center of everything they do. And she talked about their CEO saying that their workforce was their secret sauce, and again, I think that was reflected, that concept, in the use of NPS, Net Promoter Score, as one of the key metrics for satisfaction. So typically, large conglomerates will use shareholder value as their key metric. But here we see L'Oréal giving the power to staff, allowing staff say, would we recommend this place as a workplace? Is this a leader and employer of choice? And really allowing employees' voice to shape the culture and shape the fortunes of the organization. That was very meaningful to me.
They have also the means of their ambition, having created this change budget, which I found really a good idea. No matter how you do it, if it's coaching, if it's consulting, if it's training, if it's feedback, whatever you have as a tool or the lever, you create a budget to make it happen. And I really think that the coaching culture is about that, is creating an organization capable to use the coaching, the training, to develop their people, their leaders, their teams, and to create a better culture, humanistically speaking. And we also know that those organizations who have developed coaching culture has twice as much performing organization than other. So I really think it's a very inspiring example.
Yeah, some terrific lessons there that I think our audience of change makers can certainly adapt and take with them. And particularly, I think the importance of leader development, the importance of developing and empowering HR, and then putting the money behind that, as you say, having a dedicated budget. I think they are really, really crucial KPIs in this whole intervention.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to Transform Tomorrow Today with your host, me, Catherine Dano, and Linda McLachlan. Again, our gratitude to our amazing guests for so generously sharing their transformation story.
Please follow us on @transformtomorrowtoday.podcast and be sure to download our show notes and tips and strategies on our LinkedIn page @transform-tomorrow-today. Let's join together so we can transform tomorrow today.